Hello my friends, how are you? In this video we show you the latest serial killer. Gerard John Schaeffer is an American serial killer who died on December 3, 1995, who had the privacy of committing the crime while working as a police officer. Although he was convicted of only 2 murders, he is suspected of committing at least 30 murders. Gerard John Schaeffer was born in Wisconsin on March 25, 1946, but grew up in Atlanta, Georgia until he was 14 years old. He is the eldest of 3 children from a dysfunctional couple, where the father, Gerard Sr., is an alcoholic, tyrannical, verbally abusive, and adulterer who is often absent from the family home due to his work in sales for Kimberly Clark, and the isolated mother Doris whom Gerard adores. Gerard will believe all his life that he is an illegitimate child born of a hasty marriage. He also believes that his father does not love him and prefers his sister, which will make him say later that he would have liked to be a girl in order to please his father, but he also wants to die. Very early on, young Gerard showed signs that would later lead him to murder. In fact, he was barely 12 years old when he liked to tie himself to a tree. "I was sexually excited," he later said. At the same time, he was imagining experiences of slavery that were also giving him pleasure. "I began to masturbate and dream that I was hurting others, especially women." He also likes to wear women's underwear and enjoys smelling and imagining it on his future victims when he is not killing small animals to see what they do. In 1960, Gerard Schaeffer's family moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The boy, a fairly good student, obtained his high school diploma in 1964 from St. Thomas Aquinas High School and began his university course. During this period his parents separated. It's 1967. And still, Gerard keeps his delusions in his mind and begins spying on his neighbors, in particular, a person named Lee Heinlein. He consulted a psychiatrist in 1966 to seek relief from his sexual deviance and homicidal fantasies, but to no avail. At university, he met his future wife, Martha Fogg, whom he married before finishing his studies. In 1969, he became a teacher, trying to instill in his students the American values of honesty, purity, selflessness, and love, but he was fired. What is in question is his behavior, which he considered inappropriate towards his students, on whom he tried to impose his moral and political values. In 1970, he divorced a cruel husband and decided to become a priest. He took courses at the École Saint-Jean, but eventually decided to pursue law-related professions and chose the police academy at the end of 1971 after spending a few weeks in Europe and North Africa. He was 25 years old when he graduated from Broward Community College and earned a degree in criminology the following year. After a psychological test, he was dismissed from the Broward County Police Department but was hired by the Wilton Manors Police Force. March 1972. Schaeffer in a raid that led to the arrest of drug dealers. For this reason, he receives praise from his superiors, which reassures him in the profession he has chosen. Yes, but that would not last long, because after only 1 month, he was fired for illegally obtaining personal information about individuals for his own benefit, despite all ethics. On April 20th, he found himself unemployed and went looking for a new job. At the end of June, he was able to join the Martin County Police Department. For this, he moved to Stuart, still in Florida. But again, he gets fired after a month of work. This time, it will not be because computer data was accessed, but because 2 travelers were arrested. On July 21, 1972, Gerard Schaeffer was on patrol when he encountered 2 hikers on the path leading to the beach, Pamela Wells, 17, and Nancy Trotter, 18. He makes them believe that hiking is illegal in Martin County, and sends them back. He suggests they come back the next day so he can take them to the beach himself. They kiss. Instead, he took them to a secluded corner of the woods on Hutchinson Island, off a state road. There, Schaeffer ties them to a tree as he did when he was a child, and threatens to kill them or sell them to a prostitution ring. He makes numerous sexual remarks to them, draws a gun, and ties them up. Fortunately for the young girls, Schaeffer receives a phone call from the central office and has to leave immediately. So he leaves them there, tied up, balanced on the roots, with their necks in nooses. He told them before leaving that he would return to settle their scores. However, the young girls managed to free themselves and return to the road where they flagged down a police car that was passing by. They revealed to them that they had been kidnapped by a man named Schaeffer disguised as a sheriff. Upon his return there, he noticed their absence and immediately called his boss, Sheriff Richard Crowder. He then told her, "I did something stupid. You're going to be angry with me, I exaggerated my rank for 2 girls." He explains to her that he took them along, pretending to kidnap them, but with the aim of scaring them so they wouldn't do it. Start again. But the 2 young men arrived at the police station and filed a complaint in which they admitted that he was their attacker. The sheriff immediately removed his badge and charged him with false imprisonment, 2 counts of false imprisonment, and assault. Gerard Schaeffer is out on $15,000 bail. In November 1972, he pleaded guilty to an assault charge. The other charges were eventually dropped, and Judge D.C. Smith sentenced him to a year in prison followed by 3 years probation. His sentence began on January 15, 1973. During this period of freedom, Gerard Schaeffer would kill. On September 27, 1972, Susan Bliss, 17, and Georgia Jessup, 16, disappeared. They both live in Fort Lauderdale. Schaeffer kidnaps them and takes them to Hutchinson Island where he tortures them before killing them and burying them there. The girls' parents told police that they last saw them with a man named Jerry Shepard, and their daughters were going to play guitar on the beach. Susan's mother gave police a description of the car, a blue and green Datsun and a piece of the license plate. But the agents responsible for the disappearance didn't get their hands on the car until March 25, 1973, nearly 7 months later. It will be the same for objects. 3 men walking on the island will find skeletons. 4 days later, the victims were identified through dental records. It turned out that Susan Bliss was shot in the jaw and the 2 girls were tied to a tree and slaughtered. On April 7, police searched the home of Gerard Schaeffer's mother and his new wife, who was still in prison on that date due to previous events. In Gerard's room, they will discover a whole series of interesting things on many well-known and not particularly well-known victims. Among these items are numerous pieces of jewelry, more than 100 pages of writings in which Schaeffer calls his victims whores and sluts and speaks of necrophilia, sketches showing the rape and murder of young women, gold teeth, newspaper clippings, and identification cards. Cards and wallet, Susan Place. Gerard Schaeffer's other alleged victims. Nancy Leitner, 21, disappeared on October 2, 1966. Pamela Nader, 20 years old, disappeared on October 2, 1966. Carmen Marie Hollock, a 22-year-old waitress, disappeared in February 1969 and may have disappeared from her home. She dated Schaeffer for a while. One of his gold teeth was found in Schaeffer's bedroom during the search. Lee Bonadice Heinlein, 25, Schaeffer's neighbor when they were children. She disappeared in September 1969. When she left home, she told her husband that she was leaving him for her childhood friend. One of her jewelry was found in the bedroom. His skeletal remains were identified in 1978. Peggy Ron, 9 years old, disappeared on December 29, 1970. Schaeffer identified her in one of his letters in 1989. He claimed to have imitated Albert Fish's method in this murder. Wendy Stevenson, 8 years old, disappeared on December 29, 1970. Belinda Hutchins, 22, dated Gerard Schaeffer and was reported missing on January 5, 1972. Deborah Sue Lowe, 13, kidnapped on February 29, 1972. She was last seen around 8:30 a.m. on a very rainy Tuesday on her way to Rickards Middle School. She was wearing black pants, a yellow blouse, and a beige coat. Marie Priscillina, 14 years old, disappeared on October 23, 1972. Elsie Farmer, 14, also disappeared on October 23, 1972. The two teens lived in Broward County. Their jewelry and skeletons were found in Schaeffer's bedroom in early 1973. Colette Goodenough, 19 years old. Barbara Wilcox, 19 years old. The two young women were last seen alive on January 8, 1973, just 1 week before Gerard Schaeffer was due to return to prison for his sentence in connection with the Travelers. Their skeletons were not found. Despite all these disappearances and the items found during the search, Gerard Schaeffer would only be charged with 2 murders, those of Susan Place and Georgia Jessup. He was indicted on May 18, 1973 and remained in prison until his trial. This happened in October, and Schaeffer was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Will be presented. Gerard Schaeffer's lawyers filed about 20 appeals, arguing that their client was involved. All such appeals will be rejected by the various courts in which they are filed. During his imprisonment, Schaeffer would also prosecute several people for extravagant reasons such as being overweight, a writer described him that way, or FBI agent Robert Ressler for calling him a serial killer. None of these complaints were heard in court and Schaeffer was fired each time. Gerard Schaeffer was stabbed to death by his colleague Vincent Rivera on December 3, 1995 while in Stark, Florida, prison. He received 40 stab wounds to the head and neck. There have been several speculations about this death and the motives of Rivera, who received an additional 53 years and 10 months for this assassination. Certain things are important to avoid the argent of the codatinus. He feels that there is a balance. He does not agree with what this banal dispute and mal tourni a cause of this a cup of coffee. Schaeffer's sister claimed that her brother died because he had information about the murder of Adam Walsh, which Otis Toole was accused of committing. A woman will bring back to life a serial killer who returned to limbo after his death. Her name is Sandra London and she was a former friend of Schaeffer and reached out again after his conviction. London is a writer and author of detective novels, but she is also, shall we say, a fan of serial killers. Furthermore, she was engaged to one of them, Danny Rolling, who we know of at least 8 victims. A friend of Schaeffer, she published a collection of short stories called Killer Fiction, which also includes drawings found by police inspectors in the serial killer's home. A sequel to this work titled Beyond the Murderous Fantasy would also see the light of day, this time with Schaeffer's letters, including one in which he bragged about killing 34 women and teenage girls, as early as 1967. He was only 17 years old. In one of his letters, he claimed that he ate the bodies of Peggy Ron, aged 9, and that of Wendy Stevenson, aged 8. But this was probably bravado, because he was actually bragging about, among other things, his ties to the Mafia, the Ku Klux Klan, which turned out to be entirely invented. Another letter relates, as you know, he wrote on January 20, 1991, I have always insisted on a number of 34 murders. In 1973, I sat down and made a list. It came to just over 80. Schaeffer continued the next day, I'm not claiming a very high number. I'd say it's between 80 and 110. But over the course of 8 years and 3 states, a whore drowned in her own vomit, while watching me eviscerate her friend. I'm not sure this is legitimate murder. Are women considered? 2005. Detective John Curcio investigated the various murders of Gerard Schaeffer and especially those that could be attributed to him. He collected forensic evidence and submitted it to the FBI's DNA database. This evidence comes from corpse remains discovered in South Florida. March 2006. During a conference at Sam Houston University in Texas, on March 22, 2006, former police officer and detective Robert Cable announced new discoveries regarding serial killer Ted Bundy, who was executed at Stark Prison, Florida, on January 24, 1989. Cable noted that day that he had Bundy and Schaeffer committed murders together. This information came after the disappearance of clothes, underwear, and various items belonging to Rita Jolie, 17 years old, Vicky Haller, 24 years old, Catherine Devine, 14 years old, Stephanie Langer, 12 years old, and Brenda Baker, 14 years old. Were examined by an FBI laboratory that identified Ted Bundy's DNA for murders committed before 1974. But the CODIS database, above all, made it possible to highlight the presence of a second DNA, that of another serial killer who is none other than Gerard Schaeffer. Thus Ted Bundy would act in concert with Schaeffer as an accomplice. In fact, the two killers had acted over a period of 2 years, perhaps between May 1970 and the end of July 1972. These crimes were committed in Utah, Oregon, and Washington, which confirms what Schaeffer suggested. Out in several states.